I think the developer experience, right? I mean, it ties in with everything. Like it ties in with productivity. It ties with how the business can grow. It ties in with how fast you can ship, right? So the choice of a stack and tool is important. There are a lot of options, right? So depending upon what system you're dealing with, actually it goes all the way from your development environment to how you kind of ship the code, right? And that's the choices that you are going to make will have the impact on it, right? So I mean, let's say you are doing Kubernetes kind of development, and you have a front end person and that doesn't know much of back end, and in order for them to kind of have a development environment where they have to use kubectl to kind of start deployment, it's cool, right? I mean, they can do some courses, they get some training, but the up ramp is really high. And I think that's one of the things that basically doing really well, is that trying to kind of cut short that kind of aspect where you can have a deployment model where you think about the problem you're trying to solve, and not the whole abstractions around the kind of backend system you're dealing with. It's like, if you are developing on Unix systems, you kind of deal with maybe your VI or Emacs, and you kind of deal with high level libraries, right? Maybe you code in Perl, and Perl deals with Unix systems, right? And things like that. You do not need to know kernel systems, how the kernel behaves, right? You don't need to know all the integrity of Unix systems. Same goes for Windows or Mac or any system that you deal with. And that's where basically, like, do you need to know everything that's out there? And that's one of the kind of pet peeve, in a way, that all the teams I have seen that kind of struggle to kind of have the developer experience. And by developer experience, it's not just kind of writing code and all that and the tool interfaces they show, but it's the overall thing. And it also goes to writing code, shipping the code, right, deploying the code, all aspects of it. So I think it's super important that the kind of tooling and stack that you start with, at least to get a faster on ramp and have a kind of separation of concern from developer perspective and platform engineering or DevOps.
Patrick, how about you?
I mean, there's just it's so complicated. Like, that's the short answer, is like, it's complicated. Like, does it make it harder for your developers? Yes, maybe. It's complicated, right? Because on one hand, again, like we talked about earlier, like, you've got your individual developers have way more flexibility. And so let's to give an example, like, we've got a developer who's going to go, a couple developers are going to go build a new microservice. Is it harder in this new world for them? Well, they can choose to use the tools that they're familiar with. They can choose to use the stack that they think is most appropriate. They can dig into what they know and leverage all of that to more easily build the piece of software. And so, like, that's an advantage, right? It's always tough if you've ever been put in as an engineer or an engineering team, if you've ever been put in the situation where somebody said, hey, we've got this old service that nobody supports anymore, but we need you to go fix it. And sorry, it's in a language you don't know. Like, that's tough. Like, that adds a problem. That's a problem for you, and that slows you down, right? So it's easier in that aspect, is that flexibility may mean that they don't have to make weird architectural decisions to deal with some existing legacy need. But at the same time, now I also have to understand, like, if I'm going from, to use kind of the original prompt, like, I'm going from had a big monolith, now we've got a bunch of microservices. Well, now I have to understand the whole constellation of microservices, how they interact and like where they connect, and be able to go find stuff. I can't just hit Command F and like go find where this module was being defined or this class was being defined, right? Like, it's a little harder now. And so I think that the developer experience is really deeply tied, like I mentioned earlier, to like what knowledge sharing looks like and being able to collaborate better and find things more easily. Like, that is now as much developer experience than like Vivek talked about, like what my IDE is, like what my environment is. Like, that is what my wiki is, and how I'm able to go find the data that I need to be able to do my job is just as important as the editor. Which I know, like, the Vim Index people probably don't want to like throw that into debate, but like, it's just as important, right? Like, being able to find stuff. And so, I don't know, I think that's a big piece of it for me. It's like that it becomes more organic in this new world. And like, documenting that gets a lot harder.
I like how you circle back to your definition of DevOps again as well. The collaboration piece it really is the answer to a lot of this, right? Is making sure that everyone's working on the same page and toward the same goals. But as a developer, I guess my question would be, how much should they really care about the architecture, right? To some extent, they do need to know, right? Because they're developing toward a specific architecture, but how much do they really need to know about where this is being deployed and how it's being deployed? And how much can we alleviate that from them and really allow them to focus on just building quality code? Vivek, do you have
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a great point, right? In a sense that, as a developer, right? I mean, I think, and the knowledge sharing point that Patrick mentioned, right? That's super, super important. So that have a system where it's easier. So the on-ramp of things, right? There's always going to be new things coming up, right? We are living in this kind of, the era of, computing where every day new things are evolving and how do you catch up with everything about the decisions being made by different teams? And you are a microservices team. There could be 50 of microservices, and how do you keep up with everything, right? How is the repository kind of architected? How they're laid out? How is the documentation's available? How well is the API documented? There's so much, tons of things that goes along with that, and the systems that you are going to use, and the kind of the fun or easier it makes for you to kind of interact and discover things and all that. So there's one aspect of it, and then to your point about, right, like how much you need to know, right? You have you wake up and you have set of tickets in your queue and you got to crunch those, right? And anything else, right? So from the business perspective, if I'm managing a project, right, it's a super important for me is that deadlines are important, customers' expectations are important, and how do I enable everyone in the team? So there's an aspect of how they can on-ramp on things, but on the other hand, we do not want them to kind of unnecessarily on-ramp on something that doesn't concern them, right? Right, like a DevOps role is kind of blurring these days, right? But then it's those kind of challenges that team has to kind of deal, and every team is different. But I think that it's important that people who are kind of whose goal is to kind of deliver something and build something, right? They have enough time to kind of think about solving those problems than kind of distraction and not getting into things that basically make their execution harder.
Right. Patrick, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I like your clarifying question, and the question of how much should my developers need to know is kind of interesting, because I guess it depends, right? And it makes me think about, like, at GitLab, we've consciously made this decision that most of our application, not everything today, but almost all of our application is kind of wrapped into Rails. And there are a few things that we've had to pull out for specific services, but for the most part, it's one big Rails app. And the reason that we decided to do that was actually about developer experience. We've very, very carefully tried to follow the Rails way. And so if you know Rails, if you're familiar with Rails, you're familiar with how Rails works, you can just dive in and work on the product. And so that's cool. And if you think about inside your organization, that same sort of concept, right? Like if I take kind of a known workload, something that like a Rails app, if there are such good services out there today, think back, if you kind of roll the clock way back, there was a point at which it was actually kind of hard to run WordPress. I don't know if everybody remembers that, but you had to be careful about how you were configuring Apache and set things up right. That was a thing that happened a long time ago. And we've gotten to the point now where WordPress is a commodity service completely. You just click a button and there you have a WordPress install, right? I think it's the same thing has started to happen. We have some really great services out there that for common workloads, you're right. If you have made that decision as a company, we are going to, in the Paretoing it out, that center 80%, we want all workloads that our teams are building to kind of look like that. Because there are services out there that can take a Rails app or a whatever Flask app and just go deploy it. And we're seeing some kind of early work, we touched on serverless earlier, right? There's some great packaging around serverless functions now that can really easy deploy that. And there are also some for I don't know if I'd say more esoteric, right? But like, I'm interested to see where things like Packet head, right? With their recent acquisition by Equinix, like where is that going to head? So there are a lot of services out there for kind of more domestic, maybe that's a good word for it, like more kind of common workloads. Like, yeah, maybe so. If you kind of restrict your organization from doing like everything in Lisp flavored Erlang, then yeah, you probably can like use these great services out there to kind of increase the velocity by common packaging techniques. And then, yeah, they shouldn't need to know a ton about the infrastructure. So it's a great point.